I've just arrived at a place that in 1939 shocked London to its core with a gruesome discovery. It is also home to not one, not two, but three separate ghost stories, and was part of the curse that nearly crippled a King of England.
These beautiful woodlands that we find ourselves in are home to an abbey that is over 1,000 years old. It was never particularly a successful abbey, although at the time of its construction it was hoped that it was going to revolutionise the religious world in England. Unfortunately, a curse struck the abbey, and it is a curse that, by today's standards, is a fairly easy fix. But in the 1100s, when the church was being built, it really was insurmountable, and by the 1600s, the grounds of the church were completely deserted. Now only squirrels play in the forest. Perhaps they themselves have a lineage, a story to tell about the ghosts that roam these forests. Perhaps they are the ghosts that roam these forests. We've now followed the path, and it has led us finally to this magnificent ruin, this cursed place, this Lesnes Abbey. I'm standing in the doorway of the western entrance. As you can see, the ruins behind me, and what would have been behind me would have been the bulk of what we consider the actual church itself, leading all the way to the back and to the altar itself. And it's up there that we need to go first, because that particular place is of use if you're hiding from the law. As we enter this area, the sacred chancery, this area was, for a period of 500 years or so, the only area in the church that was completely controlled by God. In other words, the laws of man, or the king at the time, were not applicable here. So, any individual who needed to escape the law could dash along the long aisle, charge into the chancellery, and claim sanctuary. There are 3 chapels. Each of these chapels would have held the remains of an individual who was of significance to the church, contributors, donators, someone who had done something significant for the church. They're still interred here. They haven't been disturbed. Or have they? One of them might very well be one of our 3 ghosts. I'm standing in one of the few remaining doorways here at the Abbey, and here is the site of our second ghost, at least supposedly. This is of a knighted individual pulling on his stockings and then running past the cloister wall, mounting a horse and riding off into the sunset. Who was this individual? Why were they late? Why were they pulling their stockings on? And why, oh why, are they related to the Holy Hole? We'll talk more about that later, except that there was a tomb found in the crypt of the Abbey of a knight whose head had been removed, the carving, the head had been removed, the arms had been removed, and the torso had been removed. All that remained were a pair of legs and their stockings, mounted upon a lion. This often indicated that the knight had been involved in the Crusades in some way. Had a crusader done something foul in this church and had their tomb desecrated, forever binding them to this place? It's an interesting idea, but it does not account for the 1939 gruesome discovery, which we will find out shortly. But first, we need to go and have a nap. This rather unremarkable but very large room was the undercroft of the dormitory, which would have been above me. But what does that have to do with the second ghost? The canons, the monks that dwelt here, had a propensity... Oh, hello, column. Just when you walk into random columns, they attack randomly. It could be something to add to our adventure. Random column attack. Ah! The monks that lived here, there weren't a lot of them, but they were particularly randy, and one of the ghosts that has been seen on multiple occasions leering out of windows, such as the ones behind me here. And yes, they are small little windows. I'm just watching out for random column attacks. These windows here, looking out of these windows, the monk has been seen multiple times. How did he become a ghost? He was caught in a rather compromising position with one of the local farmers' wives. The monks weren't exactly allowed to go around fornicating with anybody, especially married women, and so the farmer scythed off his head, and the body is said to roam these grounds looking forever out the window to see if it can see where its head has been taken. Most likely the farmer chucked it into the nearby Thames River and said, "Good riddance." But that would not account for the particularly horrific discovery which I've been alluding to this entire video. For that, we're going to need to refer to the third ghost, and for that, we're going to have to go into a holy hole. But before we get there, there's one more piece of this particular monastery that I want to point out to you, for it is another kind of hole. This is the privy, or the washrooms, and the toilets, or the garderobe. There's another reason why it's kind of sunken down. This is because of an artificial canal that would have run up from there all the way along through the privy and then out behind me down towards the Thames to flush away all of the beer that the monks were no longer using. It does provide us with something of an interesting access point to this particular abbey, because from this chamber you can literally get inside all the way through to the actual centre of the church and all the way to those all-important altars covered in gold. Now, before we go into the holy hole, and I kid you not, that is what it was called, to uncover the true horror of this abbey, we have to stop and look at the curse of the abbey. When it was built, it was envisaged that it was going to become a holy site, a pilgrimage, a Mecca in England, and it never fulfilled that promise. The reason is because this side of England, the southeast of England, is sinking, and so all of the land around the abbey, except for the hills of course, were very marshy. And instead of becoming prime farmland, which would have generated income to pay for the holy site to become worth even more, it just stayed as a marsh. Things didn't improve ever. After the monastery had been dissolved by Henry VIII's decrees, well, King James then tried his hand at financial betterment of this area and had mulberry trees planted everywhere. The mulberry trees were designed to feed silkworms, which were going to generate silk, and thereby cut out the route of having to go to China to get your silk. Sadly, for the king, well, the curse of the abbey struck again, and they were the wrong mulberry trees. That's right, they're different types of mulberry trees. Silkworms only like the one type. He planted the wrong type. So this, not an original, but a damned old one nonetheless, and definitely from the original mulberry trees that were planted, of the 10,000 planted, 10,000 were wrong. And the mulberries were of no use to the silkworms or the silk industry. I'm now standing not in the holy hole, we're not there yet, because I think before we get there, we need to strengthen our courage a little bit. And what better way to do that than from here, the ruins of the brewery. Most monasteries were brewing their own ale, and they were using ale and not beer for a very specific reason. Hops hadn't yet managed to be cultivated in England, and so ale was their only choice. And that's the difference between beer and ale, by the way. Nonetheless, the monks here would have brewed their own brew. There are still monasteries to this very day, literally 1,000 years later, who are still making beer that is sold worldwide. Bearing in mind the average monk would consume between 1 to 2 pints of beer a day. It was literally healthier than drinking the local water. Well, that's thanks to the monk's sewage system. It was definitely tasting better than drinking the local unfiltered Thames River water, because you had London contributing to that taste. Ugh. And it fortified you, because it did contain some extra minerals and elements and vitamins that you just weren't going to normally get. So beer was very important, or ale, should I say. And now that we've got our pints from the ale yard of the monastery, let us descend into the holy hole and solve the mystery of Lesnes Abbey. The moment I have been promising you has finally arrived. We will uncover the mystery of the horrific discovery that was made in 1939 and that brought London to a standstill. It is also the site of the Holy Hole. It is this chamber here. As you can see, there are some steps going down, and it would lead even further down, although it has been filled in subsequently. The Holy Hole was a form of a crypt, not the crypt, but a form of crypt, which was only added to churches or to abbeys that had a holy relic, something from a saint, and it had to be certified as well. The Holy Hole here at Lesnes Abbey, down there, contained the handkerchief of the Virgin Mary. Believe it or not, that's supposedly what it had. It also had some other relics of St. Thomas à Becket, who was murdered by knights following the orders, or at least the supposed request, of another King of England. This caused him to have to pay penance later on. What a pity. Anyway, the Holy Hole also contained a stone tomb, a coffin, a sarcophagus, call it what you will. Inside, a lead-lined box. What was inside the box was truly, truly macabre. It was the heart of a young woman. Unfortunately, it wasn't actually a heart of a young woman. It was a heart of a 75-year-old who had died madly and passionately in love with her husband, and she had looked after this abbey through really immense trials and tribulations. She inherited the abbey. She didn't have a lot of money to look after it. She married her husband, frittered away all of their fortunes, nearly lost the abbey. Thankfully, he died before the abbey was sold off to pay his debts. Another King of England pardoned this young woman, although by now she was in her 60s, and said that the land was hers until her death. Well, she still had to pay off the debts, though. And so she luckily managed to marry yet another man who was madly in love with her. The two of them spent 7 years paying off their debts, and once the debts had finally been paid, the abbey was hers forever, without any risk of it being taken away. She died a few years later at the tender age of 75, and she was interred here in the abbey as befitting a champion of this place. Now, her heart was removed from her chest. This was something that happened a lot in the medieval ages. Why? Why was the heart removed from the chest? Well, because a lot of the knights on the Crusades would have had their bodies buried wherever they happened to have fallen, but their hearts removed and returned here to sunny England, where they might be properly buried in the church or the graveyards of their choice. Now, why was the heart found in 1939 in a lead-lined box? Well, normally the heart would have been kept in a niche somewhere in one of the chapels that we have seen previously. But for whatever reason, it had been moved down into the Holy Hole to sit beside the handkerchief of the Virgin Mary and the bits and pieces of Thomas à Becket. And why was that done? Who knows? But that solves the gruesome discovery that brought London to a standstill in 1939 when the History Society was excavating the site. It was considered such a romantic tale and was so beautiful and wonderful. It did, of course, then spur on the third and final ghost, the woman whose heart it was, a lady by the name of Rosia of Dover. She was interred here, and it is her ghost that supposedly roams these ruins looking for her heart. But we know that her heart was well secured in the hands of her loving husband, who honoured her funerary wishes, no matter how macabre they might be. Anyway, I think we've got enough inspiration from Lesnes Abbey to go back and create some particularly exciting adventures, and I have one more stop to make, but you're not invited. I'm going to the cafe for lunch. I'll catch you up in the studio.